there. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Della Rucker. I'm the principal of the Wise Economy Workshop and author of the book, The Local Economy Revolution Has Arrived, What's Changed and How You Can Help. I'm so delighted to be able to share some time this evening with a couple of women that I just admire and am so happy to be able to have a chance to spend some time with. Because, you know, we don't always get to do that anymore. And especially to have what I think will be a fun conversation, but also an important conversation. So this is part of the AccelerateUS Salon series. AccelerateUS is a series of what we call dispatches from the front lines of the people who are creating the local economy revolution. And part of what we're going to be talking about today is what happens when you have those kinds of responsibilities in your community and it's not going the way anybody intended. So we're going to be talking about fear. We're going to be talking about uncertainty. And we're going to be talking about what happens when people don't like you. And I think it's particularly interesting to have that conversation with three women. And we'll get into the gender dimensions a little bit, but I also think that it's going to be super interesting to think about how that fear and how we manage that fear plays out in lots of different types of environments. So Laura Fritz is a CXD, a Certified Economic Developer, and she's a fellow member, which means she's a big kahuna, of the International Economic Development Council. Laura has been the Director of Economic Development, or similar titles, for the city of Annapolis, the city of Salt Lake City. That always sounds weird. Is that the way you're supposed to say it? The city of Salt Lake City? Okay, whatever. For that place, and for the city of Richmond, Virginia, in addition to others. Laura is also the host and manager of an economic development series on Clubhouse that goes off once, twice, 3 times a week, and really has been a fascinating place of insight. Anne is, I made a joke the other day about Anne being Maine's favorite urban planner. I don't know if she actually, like can claim to be Maine's favorite. I would like to think that she is Maine's favorite urban planner. She has spent most of her career, I believe, in the great state of Maine and has worked for rural communities, more urban communities, at least by Maine standards. She has also worked in economic development roles in addition to planning roles, but her predominant experience, her predominant life has been on the urban planning side. So we have an economic developer and an urban planner. For those of you who don't work with governments, these are two of sort of the key community roles that you'll find in big cities, little cities, rural communities all over the map. And these are the kind of folks who very often end up on the front lines of change and conflict as a part of their jobs. So I want to thank both of you for being here. If you were looking for Enoch, Enoch Elwell unfortunately had another obligation, a kind of a command performance tonight. So Enoch's not going to be able to join us, but I promise you that if I can get his insights into this stuff down the road, Enoch is one that we will definitely want to hear from. So, Laura, why don't you start, kind of add to the introduction that I gave you, but I'm also, as you introduce yourselves, I want you to answer a question. And they weren't prepped on this ahead of time. So, this is called thinking on your feet. They're like, oh God, now what she did was. So, as you could say whatever you want to say to sort of fill out the story of who you are and why you do what you do. But I also want you to tell us about your silliest fear, the stupidest fear you have. So I'm going to go first. My silliest, stupidest most pointless fear is slugs. I freak out when I find a slug. It is screaming, it is yelling, it is running away, it is, we revert to being 4 years old. That's my stupidest fear of all of the possible fears. So, Laura, tell us.
Well, Della, thank you so much for having me join you tonight. I'm so excited to talk about fear. I truly believe that when you're in public service, you should always do things that scare you, right? I think it's really important. And really, I've tried to do that throughout my career. So I've spent over 25 years in economic development, having done everything from running a Main Street program to a large city department. And, it's been really a rewarding career. And I would say that you're going to be surprised by my silliest fear, because as somebody who's been in public service, who has a lot of requirement to do public speaking, you would think that I'd be really comfortable with it. But it truly is still one of my biggest fears. I absolutely hate doing it. I do it because I have to, but I still have that that gut clench before I have to get up and speak. Isn't that strange? Yeah.
I will say, before Anne chimes in, I will say that is, depends on what you look at, that's either the first or second most common fear of all human beings. Like, that's totally normal. Yeah. And the fact that you get scared, that actually makes you better. True. Because you don't get glib about it, and you don't just go, oh, blah, 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 I can whatever. So, but yeah, so that's fascinating that you can do something over and over and over and over and over again over the course of a career, and it's still the thing that makes you go before you get into it. Wow. All right, Anne.
Well, and to go along with the slug fear, I'm an arachnophobe, but see, I don't consider that silly because it's very real. They are going to kill me in my sleep. So yeah,
because you have black widows in Maine?
When my daughter lived in Santa Fe, she would get up early in the morning and sweep the stoop so that I wouldn't see any of the black widows that were outside her door. She didn't tell me this till after I flew home, thank goodness, because I would have left immediately on the next flight if I'd known. So, but in terms of speaking in front of people, I do get more nervous, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. I get more nervous in a small group than I do speaking in front of a town meeting of 200 people. Like, that doesn't bother me. It's sometimes it's the smaller group, and I think some of it is I get this is sort of goes into the whole fear factor thing of it is I just get hypersensitive to people's body language or and I overreact to it. It's like a paranoia. So, but I do think overall though fear is very humbling, and it means that you're taking things seriously.
I would agree with that. And it sounded like your sound got a little glitchy there. You might want to double check your connection.
Is my sound not working? Can you hear
It's
me
working. Now? It's just starting to sound a little funny. You sounded fine at first, and then
it's so interesting you say that, because mine's the opposite. Small group, I'll talk to a small group all day long. It's like being in somebody's living room and just chatting, right? It's when you get to the big group, and it goes back to the personal dynamic. You get into a room of 400 people, and people are on their cell phones, and they're not really listening. They're there because they're, they have to be there, but they're not as engaged as a small group.
Yeah, I thought it should be.
And so it feels slightly personal. Like, am I not engaging enough that people aren't paying attention to me?
Right.
Oh, you guys aren't nearly as egotistical as I am. I'm like, look at me! I'm here!
And that's why we like to speak with you.
I
Totally.
probably just blew the
Because
microphone out too.
you have that good energy that I just feed off of. So
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, but that's fascinating that the first fear we end up talking about is this one that's so universal, and yet I never had a whole lot of fear of public speaking personally. I'm scared of lots of other things, but that was never one for me too much. You get a little nerve sometimes, but not like the way you guys are describing it. When in economic development, in community development and urban planning, do you find that you have to be like, you have to sort of suck it up and be brave? And certainly public speaking, I think you're both saying that in certain contexts, that's one of them. But what are the kinds of situations where you kind of feel that kind of catch going on in your day-to-day work?
well, I had to do it last night. We're dealing with people experiencing homelessness is a big issue in Bangor, like it is everywhere in the country. It's not a unique issue to us. And I had to present, some zoning changes regarding it. And, it's a really tough situation for the city to grapple with, get their head around. And so I knew it was going to be emotionally difficult meeting. So what I do to counteract that is I do it's considered now old fashioned, but I do the old fashioned PowerPoint where I just, so that, the focus isn't on me, it's on this screen that has my outline of my talk. So that way I don't get nervous because I know I'm going to hit all of my points because I've got the outline in front of me. And it gives the audience something to look at and focus on. And so it sort of takes the personal out of it a little bit. So, and it ended up, being a productive conversation. We learned a lot of things, a lot of people's fears, and I think it went well. And I think sometimes formalizing things, it actually does help quell, what is a really difficult situation.
So that allowed you to get a little bit of distance.
What's that?
It allowed you to get a little bit of distance.
Yes.
But then it also, do you think that it changed the experience for the audience, the participants? Did they interact with the information and with the topic differently?
I think so because it kind of forced because I wanted to force the conversation on, the matter at hand kind of thing, and not all of the extraneous, because, if you've worked in situations regarding homelessness, it's, there's so many factors, and you can get bogged down in all of these other things that are happening. And so I think it helped them focus on the matter at hand, as opposed to all of the, all the other points,
all the other things that they could be thinking about.
Oh yeah. I mean, you could spend weeks in a conversation on it.
Yeah.
So,
that makes sense. And Laura has dealt with. Laura actually pioneered a program in Salt Lake City to get some people who were unhoused into employment. That was really fascinating to watch. But certainly in the communities that you've done, I know you've been through some very, very, very contentious. I can't even begin to list them. The homeless one's probably one of the easier ones of the ones you've dealt with, Laura.
Yeah, I mean,
Anne's right. Where do you find that you have to sort of find some bravery?
Yeah, Anne's so right that contention is something that's really difficult. She did one of the most important things, which is try to stick to the facts by putting the presentation together and making that the forefront. And I think that another really important detail is to remember who you're serving.
Mm.
If it's somebody experiencing homelessness, if it is the citizens of a neighborhood, if it is, the mayor, whoever you're representing in that contentious conversation has to be top of mind when you go into that conversation, so that you always know where your true north is when you're having that conversation, right? Because emotions start to run high. You start to think about, oh, well, maybe they are right. This is a really good argument. But then you have to take that step back and remember where your true north is. My true north is, this is where I need to be. This is where I know I need to be advocating for. And so it may still be a very contentious conversation, but you can walk out of that conversation being very confident in how you presented yourself and how you handled yourself, because you stayed true to who you were representing.
Yeah.
Ooh. I really like that. That's a really fascinating insight, and the idea of, as you put it, Laura, that the true north. So having that very sharp, clearly defined sense of, this is my purpose, this is my focus, this is my responsibility in this context. And I really love the fact that you brought the idea of, it's not about me, it is my job as a servant, quote unquote, of this community. So let's talk a little bit about that true north. So in different situations, you're going to have a different true north. When you're going into a situation like that, you mentioned a lot of it depends on who you're representing. And if you're there as a representative of the mayor, or you're there as a representative of an entity, you have certain responsibilities. But within that context, for you yourself, how do you determine where that true north needs to be in a given context?
Yeah. And wouldn't it be wonderful, Della, if it was one true north? Right?
Oh, that'd make it easy.
Yeah.
It'd be so simple. Many times you're representing multiple interests. You're representing the mayor, you're representing the city council, you're representing your department, you're representing the neighborhood and the residents in that neighborhood, and you're representing the project because you're going to be an investor in it or whatever, right? And
you meaning the city, not Laura Fritz. Don't go hitting her up with your, your Ponzi schemes.
So these phone calls come in, hey, I hear you're going to invest. Yes, as a city department, I'm going to make an investment. So, when you have those multiple true norths, sometimes it can get a little fuzzy. But it's really important to kind of think about the hierarchy as well, right? Who's the person that's going to fire you today if you botch this? That's always a good true north. The second is, who's funding my department? That's always a good true north. But then, ultimately, all of these individuals, whether it's the mayor or the council, they're all representing the citizens of that community. And so that's really ultimately where my true north and my hierarchy goes to. Am I acting in the best interest of this community? And, one thing that I do with my staff is we go through all the potential arguments that are going to come at us in a public meeting and make sure that we're prepared for every single question that may come up.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. We still get.
You're still going to get sideswiped.
Still get the question that goes, oh, yeah, we didn't think of that one. But we really do try to go in really prepared.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how they can come up with stuff where you go, really? Wait, where did that come from?
One thing about having worked in the DC metro area, they will come in with like charts and graphs and binders of data, and you're like, where did you find that data? That's so impressive.
Wow.
I do want to come back to that in a minute. Anne, what were you thinking?
No, I just wanted to hear more about this data thing. What happened?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I have an interesting story to tack on to that. But yeah, so there's something going on, and people literally are doing their own research and walking in with their own set of statistics that are different from what I forget whether you were at a regional agency, or you were in a city, or the city?
Yeah, it was both of them were in cities. Yeah,
Okay.
where we were talking about the traffic around this particular development. We had a third party traffic analysis conducted, and inevitably in the DC metro area, there's always somebody who is in that career field,
Right.
and they always show up with the data, and it's fun, 'cause
Like they ran their entire separate traffic impact analysis?
yeah, they've already run their own.
Oh my gosh. I've never had that happen, I have to say.
Yeah. Your concentration of board of traffic engineers is apparently a little lower in Maine than it is in DC.
Everybody's a traffic engineer.
Well, that's also true. That's also definitely true. I actually had a situation a couple of weeks ago. I was doing an IEDC disaster recovery trip. So IEDC, which is the International Economic Development Council, will send professionals to communities to give them some advising as part of an EDA grant. And so I went to a community in Louisiana, and this was before the horrible hurricane that they've just been through. But the biggest concern at the time was over a container cargo terminal that was being proposed. Now, these are very big developments. They're very sophisticated. There's a lot of equipment. There's a lot of, and in order to do this, the Port Authority, the Port of New Orleans, has to go through a very exhaustive environmental impact statement. And you guys both know for those who don't, an environmental impact statement is basically a comprehensive analysis of all of the possible economic is one of them, but environmental, ecological, transportation, and everything analysis. And this hasn't been done. This is a brand new proposal. None of this had been done for this property. For some reason or the other, this is at the very, very, very beginning of the process, some people in the community started to become very concerned about this potential proposed possible development. And they started doing their own research. So this is not in DC, this is in Louisiana. They compiled exhaustive amounts of information on other places, on other container terminals, which I think at the end of the day is really, really, really valuable information. But it raised that fear factor. And so, it was raising the fear factor in the community, in addition to, the fear and the anxiety and the kind of risk of being rejected on the part of the professionals, the people who were on the nonprofit and on the local government level responsible for the community. And so, yeah, I mean, the data, it seems like sometimes can be a two-edged sword. You know what I mean? It can be helpful in the right context, like the situation that Anne described, where it was able to sort of diffuse. But in another context, especially, data that might not be specifically relevant to that location, can actually amp up the fear level, unfortunately, kind of unnecessarily, because a lot of it probably didn't apply to this particular context.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great opportunity to kind of call out what the fear is, right? Thank you so much for bringing this information to our attention. What is it that really is your fear? Help me understand where the concern lies, because it could be that what their concerns aren't even part of this particular proposed project, right? And so really understanding what their fear is critical to being able to move the needle and get further down the path, right? When I go into a contentious conversation, my goal is, what's the path forward? The goal is not to sit here and argue this out. It's to find the path forward. And really the way to get forward is to understand where the concern lies.
Nice.
Yeah. It makes me think a few years ago in a different community, I was working on a streetscape project, and I had this great landscape architect that we had hired, and we had the beautiful set of plans, new design, street trees, brick, the whole thing. And I went to the public meeting and presented it, and there's a lot of concern, all the different types of things you expect at a streetscape meeting. But this woman came up.
Why don't you elaborate on that? I mean, trees and planters sounds lovely, right?
Right, but a lot of people, they talk about what the construction's going to be like, and am I going to have
what kind of trees?
Yeah, what kind of trees? Is it going to block my sign? All of these kind of in the weeds, literally kind of conversations, and so that was fine. But what was really amazing, I don't know if amazing is the right word, but this woman came up to me after the meeting and she said, "Anne, do you know why I don't like you?" And I said, "No, tell me." And she said, "You're trying to make this town too pretty." And, I think one of the takeaways when those kinds of things happen is you do have to stop and think, okay, what's the symbolic gesture with that? And it was that fear of, she lived on that street. She was worried about, as much as everybody says, oh, this project's going to take away my value, there's also people that are saying, if you add too much value to my land, I'm going to pay more taxes and I won't be able to stay in this town. And, it's that whole, and gentrification issues that planners and downtown planners and economic development folks that we all, have to grapple with. It's like when we get successful, there is that fear of pushing. We don't want to push people out. We want to keep the local businesses going. And I want this lady to stay on Main Street in her house. And, and I really got it. I mean, in the moment I was like, okay, here we go. I was just waiting for when she said, "Do you know why I don't like you?" I was just like, okay. But then when she said that, it really, the light bulb went off. Like, oh yeah, we have to really be mindful of, it's that respecting their fear kind of thing where you can't just be quick to judge. You have to think about it and say, yeah, this is a big change for her,
Yeah. It's fascinating, this conversation, which is always what the best conversations do, is going in a direction that wasn't where I expected. And because we started and kind of, at least my, sort of half-formed intent, and I mean half-formed in that I wanted to go where it would go, but I thought we would be talking a lot more about the experience of the professional, and we've certainly talked about that a good deal. But you have both now taken a turn into talking about the people on the other side of the table, the community, the woman who comes up and tells you something like that, which sounds like such a Maine thing to do. I can't imagine them pulling that in DC. No.
They do it a little bit differently, but it's the same intent.
Yeah. But it's going to be, it's there's going to be a bless your heart in there somewhere too, right? or something like that. Maybe not in DC. It depends on, what part of the metro you're on. But so you've both done this sort of turn to looking at the fear on the other side of the table, in addition to the fear that you might be encountering. And that's a level of empathy that I don't think we always associate with economic development, with urban planning, and I gripe about this a lot in my own writings, that we expect to just like, I'm the expert, I'm going to tell you what to do, and we're going to make this work, and done. Where do you think, what's the role of empathy in this context? And I'm also wondering if you over the course of your careers have perceived yourselves approaching these kind of situations in a manner different from your colleagues. And I'm thinking especially your, forgive me, male colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about our own fears of, presenting and conflict and all of those things that we have to do every day, I think one of the ways to deal with those types of fears is to be empathetic for the person. So it's like, yeah, somebody said something very confrontational to me. Do you know why I don't like you? And then, and yeah, definitely 10, 15 years ago, if that situation happened, I might have been a puddle in the corner, and I think there is value. I will say the value of getting older, right? Is that, I think I have changed a lot where I did automatically, the part of me was kind of snarky about it. And then the other part of me was like, I wonder what she's going to say, but years ago, I don't think I would have been like that. I think I would have been really taken aback by that comment.
So this is something that happened to you relatively recently?
No, it was about 5 years ago. So
okay. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
But
yeah, I don't know how I would. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ann.
I was just going to say, but if I was a lot younger than that, I don't know if I would have been as good a sport.
So part of it is sort of is aging.
Yeah.
But what about aging do you think gives you that kind of increases that potential for empathy?
I think for me, it's more like I've just seen a lot. I've seen a lot of things go terribly wrong, and I've seen a lot of things go really right. So you just kind of, it's not that you're weathered or worn down. It's a much more positive feeling of being able to wade through a lot of the junk to get to, the crux of the situation. I think it's sort of true north almost that Laura was saying.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. What were you thinking, Laura?
I think that I always talk about empathy being my secret sauce, right? That being empathetic is one of the things I really pride myself on. Because one, I think that I want the community and my stakeholders to be as excited about a project as I am when I'm presenting it. Right? And if they're not, then let's try to find the path forward. Please don't get me wrong. There's still times where you can take negative feedback, but you still have to make a decision. And the beautiful thing about public service is you're not the only one making the decision. Ultimately, you have to put that decision in front of, a legislative body. So like a city council, for example. So, but my goal is by the time it gets there to make sure that I have enough community buy-in that they know that I've listened to them and that I've tried to find that path forward. The second is, Deli, you asked the question about men and women. And I think that one thing I've really prided myself on is when building out teams of economic development professionals, looking for staff that are mission driven, that they truly believe in the work that we're doing, because that also helps with that empathy. And so I really haven't seen a difference in the staff that I've worked with, because they're all looking for the mission of the organization and working toward bettering our communities and bringing jobs and investment to our communities. And, ultimately, I think everybody knows that these contentious conversations can make a project better. Which is,
but we don't always let that be. And by we, I mean we collectively, we who are of the public and saying no, 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 no. We who are on the community side and saying yes, 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 yes. What you're describing is a flip of the paradigm from what outsiders might often expect to be the case. You know,
yeah.
and this is in part because a lot of times what we see in media or in sound bites or in the, you know, the screaming Facebook group or whatever is this piece,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But what you're describing is a very, very different process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to get people to flip that equation. So as long as we're going this direction, let me ask you about this. How have you, in your experience, found the ability to change that equation, to go from an assumption or an expectation of conflict? Because, I mean, face it, even the way we set up city council meetings, it's almost like you expect it to be a gladiator sport, right? I mean, literally, it's like there's a circle and there's the big wig sitting up here, and I've got 3 minutes to yell at you about something or whatever. So we've got kind of this expectation almost physically built in. How have you guys found that you've been able to subvert or flip those expectations?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, I think for me, one of the ways is to find the champions in the community for a project before that first public meeting. Sometimes it may not be specifically for that project, but you just know that they're supporters of economic development, or they're supporters of having a coffee shop, or whatever it is. And really having them help engage during that meeting as well, so that there's not just the negative voices, but there's a voice or voices in the community that help to offset what could be just a total and complete ruckus, right? And the second,
so you kind of pre-planned it a little bit.
Yeah.
Or you've at least made sure that you're not leaving it to chance that the voices who support this initiative will come forward.
Right, because I think there's the vocal minority, right, where the people, there may be a small group of people, but wow, they can be the loudest, especially against a project or something that we're working on. And so often people who agree with it or are empathetic to, or are apathetic to it, don't show up. And so trying to engage other voices in the conversation, I find can be really helpful, because then it's not the city staff person, but it's neighbor to neighbor having that conversation. And I think that can be valuable. And then the second piece is being very upfront that you want to find the path forward, right?
Yeah.
That we're not just trying to railroad this through. We really do want to find the path forward. You may not ultimately end up liking the path, right? But let's try to find a path that we can all agree to.
What are you thinking?
I find in my current community, it's very different, and I really love the change. The city council, the chief elected officials, they, instead of having like a plethora of committees, they form their own subcommittees on things. So like there's an infrastructure, there's a finance committee, there's a business and economic development committee. That's the one I'm usually at. And there's an airport committee. So, I mean, they have a series of, but the committees are not other advisory. It's the counselors themselves. So by the time we get to that formal council meeting with the podium and the whole thing, we've already worked out a lot of the issues. So I'm dealing directly with them, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and, going through everything. I mean, there's the ability for the public to weigh in all of those steps. But I know my audience. I can sort of read the room. Like sometimes I'll walk in and I can just feel the energy from the counselors where they just want me to do a very quick summary of what's going on. And then other times I'll come in and I feel like, the way they kind of sit in their chair a certain way where we're here for the evening, let's have a chat. And then you kind of respond by saying, okay, let's have a conversation. And I think when things are difficult situations, if I can, I like to give multiple options, because then they, as in their role, they don't feel like, well, either we do this or we have nothing. They don't feel that kind of trap. You don't want to make people feel like they're trapped. Yeah. So, and sometimes that is the case, and I'm just honest about it. I think that's the nice thing too about the whole empathy thing, is that I do find when I just say, I'd love to give you a set of 3 options, but we really don't have any, and here's your only option that we're recommending. But if I can do multiple options, I do, and I think that helps.
Okay. So you keep the doors open as much as possible, but you're also forthright about and transparent about when the situation is constrained such that it's like, it's got to be this thing.
Right.
And one thing that I've done is, when I know it's going to be constrained, is try to do small group meetings with the city council so that they are prepared for what I'm going to bring to the table. Because the last thing in the world I want is an elected official to be blindsided by something I'm bringing up. So as much as I possibly can, getting those small group meetings in to kind of ward off the surprise factor of one option can be really helpful.
How would you translate this last set of recommendations about options, getting together ahead of time, etc., to people who are not professionals but maybe are advocates within their communities, or are involved? They're involved in community initiatives, but they don't have a staff relationship with those counselors or with those elected officials.
I think it's very similar. I don't know about you, Anne, but I think that, one, if you're going to go out to a community meeting on something, don't just come with the no. Come with, here's some solutions, right? Yes. Even though our staff has done a great job and we've tried to look at every solution, we may have missed one, and you may have the golden ticket, right, to find that path forward. So please come with ideas, but not just the no's. And the second is, the community can do those small group meetings as well. Have the conversations with the elected officials before it becomes, a public conversation. Often the city council members will bring you in to those conversations as staff. And so you can hear what their concerns are and what they're sharing with the city council member. Absolutely. Now, the grocery store conversations where they bump into them at the grocery store, those I can't, I'm not going to hear. But developing that really positive relationship with your city council, they'll call you and say, hey, I just ran into Mrs. Jones at the grocery store. What the heck? Tell me about these 5 things. So that relationship development is really important too.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Yeah, I know, because we've had a few grassroots things happen in my community, and it's always comes from a group of people that get together, they pull together a plan, and and the steps to implement, and the council is very supportive of that. They I think it's important, just like in any situation that you need to confront something and you want action, is you sort of give the facts and give the action steps and be part of the solution. I think if you're willing to be part of the solution, then that's always going to be a positive factor.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've said for years when people would ask me when I was doing urban planning and doing a lot of comprehensive plans and the like, who should be on our steering committee? And I almost invariably said, go bigger. And in my case, I was an ex-teacher, so I knew how to handle large groups of unruly people. Ain't nobody worse than a middle schooler. Like, I didn't find that. I've seen some pretty crazy stuff, but when you have seventh graders as your context, it's like, nobody's doing that. Okay. But when I think that whole question of we might have the intention to be open like that and to be welcoming of a community members bringing solutions or bringing initiatives. Sometimes that's not communicated, and sometimes they might not know that. And I'm thinking, especially when you have populations that have had a bad history with the local government, especially if you're talking about people who are minorities or indigenous or immigrants or have somehow not built that relationship. But the same can be certainly true of majority populations as well. So you've both had situations where you had to take a stand. You had to go back to that term we've used, there's a true north. You've got a true north. You've got a responsibility. But you know that taking that stand, and this is kind of heavy, but I know you've both been there, it's going to impact you. It's going to impact your friendships. It's going to impact your work relationships, perhaps. It might impact your ability to persuade other people or wield power. Might even, be a threat to your job. What did you do? And I don't want you to feel like you got to drag out the whole gory story, but what were the decisions that you had to make? And if you had to go back, with hindsight being 2020, how would you have done it differently?
I know that's a tough one.
Yeah. So I actually had a really interesting scenario where the state had created legislation that infinitely harmed the city. And through this piece of legislation, created a board of directors to oversee the monies that would flow from this legislative decision. And the mayor appointed me to the board of this very contentious entity where the public was angry. The mayor was suing the governor over this piece of legislation. It was a very contentious process. And yet I needed to maintain my relationships with the state legislature. I needed to maintain my relationships with the economic development offices at the state and the county, as well as the chamber, and all these wonderful stakeholders who served on this board. And that's why when I talk about the True North, I think one thing that really kept me focused was knowing who I was representing. And at the end of the day, through all these crazy interwebbed relationships, I was still representing the citizens of that community. And so every decision I made, is this in the best interest of the community? Is this money being spent in the best interest of the community? And I would hope that if anyone were to ask one of the stakeholders that was involved in this contentious project how I handled myself, I would hope that they would say that I always kept the community at the forefront, and that I always handled myself well. And so, what would I do differently? I think I'm really proud of the way that I handled what was a really awkward and difficult time. But
Yeah.
I think ultimately everyone knew that when I went in to vote, I wasn't voting against you, Anne, or you, Della. I was voting for the community, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So you maintained your integrity within that role.
yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Anne?
Well, I think one of the hardest things, and I'm sure it's not just in Maine that this happens, but we have sort of this conflicting population at times between the people who have been here for generations in Maine, and then you have people that have come here, as we call it, from away. I'm from away. I grew up in Syracuse, New York, so I am definitely away. And then when I add that I also worked in Massachusetts for 17 years before coming to Maine, it's just like it's a double whammy. So anyway, but there's, so you have sort of extremes on all sides, and it's very telling of what's happening nationally as well, that those far extremes. And as planners, we have to hear both sides. We end up being somewhat moderate, over time, because you've spent your whole career listening to both sides. But what happens when the extremes get so extreme that one side sees you too far to the other side, and then the other side sees you too far to the other side, and so you sort of make everybody mad. And I mean, really, there's not much you can do. I mean, I hate to say that out loud, but I mean, you just have to kind of stay with your true north, and you have to hope for the best, that you just are doing everything you can to find common ground. But sometimes you can't. I mean, sometimes the best thing that happens to you is that you move on.
Yeah.
Even in the moment, you don't think that's the case, but sometimes it really is the best thing that happened to you.
And by move on, in this case, you mean move on
To another
to
town.
a different employer, to a different town.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
That can definitely be the case. Sorry?
And that's hard,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And that ends up being the thing that nobody wants to do. And, I think everybody who's been, down the road a few clicks has had situations where they wish they had left sooner.
Oh, yeah.
And they've had situations where they left, and if they had to do it all over again, the grass wasn't greener on the other side, for lack of a better way to put it. But I think that's really important. And I think that to use this phrase we keep using, that holding true to the true north. I'm working on a short document about the fusion economy and some of the impacts, the emerging, post-industrial revolution economy, and what that's going to mean for local communities. And one of the things that keeps coming up over and over and over again is that integrity, reputation, transparency, those all become currencies, and they all become basically the currency of your personal brand, your personal reputation. And, we've all seen people who didn't live by that, and somehow they still keep going along. But more and more, it seems like that is really what kind of the zeitgeist is going to demand of us, is to demonstrate, that we've maintained that true north, and that's the sign of the person with integrity.
Wow.
So
I love that you use the word transparency. Like, we could do a whole conversation on how to enhance transparency, because, more and more people are demanding full understanding. And again, as civic leaders and as public servants, I think we have a responsibility to make sure that not only are we providing the information, but we're providing the information in a way that everyone can understand it.
Yes.
And that may mean charts and graphs and infographics and, whatever. But more and more, I think we have a responsibility to, again, provide equity in the way that we present information.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We should have that conversation. I like that. I'm on board. I'm on board.
Yeah. And it goes back to that sort of that sense of humility, when we're talking about fear, is that sense of humility to say, this isn't about me. This is about making sure these people understand this project, this zoning, this future, endeavor, in a full way, and, prepare that FAQ and all of it.
Yeah. Sorry, Anna, I didn't mean to step on you. But,
no,
okay. I think we have degrees in the work that we do. We have experience in the work that we do. So when we start throwing out the acronyms and, we get in our zone, we kind of forget that our audience may not have a full understanding of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And until very recently, that was considered pretty acceptable, right? I mean, I think we all, if we look at people a generation or two ahead of us, to use a thing that's going around the internet, I'm right, you're wrong, shut up. There's a whole subtext to that, but that used to be, again, that's an industrial era kind of organizational hallmark. There's a boss and there's minions, and you do what you're told. And that's not the case anymore, and won't continue. It will become less the case.
Yeah.
I think we're all seeing that unfolding. So, but I think that humility that you named, Anne, and that sense that it's not about me, I think that's a really profound challenge. So let me ask you guys one more question. And that is that if you were talking to someone who is a new planner, a new community developer, a new economic developer, or a new person to try to be active in the life of their community, being an advocate, being a grassroots organizer, but somebody who's newly coming into this space that can be contentious, that can be scary, that can sometimes involve some level of risk to ourselves or our reputation or our ego, at least. What advice would you give those folks based on your experience and a couple of trips through the School of Hard Knocks?
Well, I would say, again, to stay, to try to stay humble and be empathetic, to listen. I mean, really, the profession is all about inhaling, and then when we exhale, we're exhaling. These are things you can do to get to where you need to go. Like, you want to see this type of thing, development in your community. Well, these are the ways that we can get that. But it's all about, it's not a lot of telling, it's a lot of inhaling. And I think that's really an important piece. And I think that's how you gain respect of the community, because you have to do that every day, every meeting. It's a new day every day. So
yep.
Yeah.
Wow. Cool. Very cool. Laura, you got any final words?
So I'm going to use a quote from the musical Hamilton, which is, if you stand for nothing, Burr, what will you fall for? So as a community advocate, make sure that you're standing up for things that you feel really passionate about. But know that the city staff is not there to have you falling for something, that we're really there to be that educator and to help you navigate to an even better project.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, ladies. Any last words?
No, this was great. Thank you
Good.
so much.
Yeah.
I'm
I
so
always
glad.
get re-energized. I always get re-energized by these types of conversations. So thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. And that's another conversation we could have sometimes is burnout, frustration, and re-energizing. And Anne was actually a contributor. And that's why I asked when that situation happened, because I think you tell a story like that in your, the selection that you contributed to why this work matters.
Oh,
which,
yeah, no, that was the worst story.
That was what?
That was the worst one.
Oh, okay. I didn't know we were going to talk about that book, so I don't have a copy that I can like grab easily. But yeah, Anne wrote a beautiful selection. I'll add that to link to that book to the comments. Really talking about a lot of the things that we've been thinking about today. Apparently, it was even worse. So go figure. But yeah,
I still believe.
yeah,
That's right.
that's cool. That's really cool. Laura, anything?
No, but thank you so much for having me. And it was such a pleasure to be here with you, Della. And of course, Anne, it was such a pleasure to get to know you more.
Yes, you too. Yeah, I like that.
Absolutely. So now that I, know how brilliant you guys can be, you can expect we'll be talking about transparency sometime in the future. All right?
Looking forward to it.
Okay. I'm
Cool.
happy to do it.
Cool. Thanks. All right, folks. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Again, I'm Della Rucker. If you want to learn more about preparing for a healthy and resilient future for your community, I'll have links to these two ladies and their work down below. And you can find show notes at wiseeconomy.com. And thanks again to Laura and Anne for a wonderful conversation. It's so much fun. And to all the rest of you and to them as well. It's time to go get them. Thanks.